Chapter 9 continued. Night visitors. At 1:30 in the morning, Alex's eyes blinked open and he was instantly awake. He slipped out of bed and dressed quickly in his darkest clothes, then left the room. He was half surprised that the door was unlocked and the corridors seemed to be unmonitored. But this was, after all, Sale's private house, and any security would have been designed to stop people coming in, not leaving. Sale had warned him not to leave the house, but the voices behind the metal door had spoken of something arriving at 2:00. Alex had to know what it was. He found his way into the kitchen and tiptoed past a stretch of gleaming silver surfaces and an oversized American fridge. Let sleeping dogs lie, he thought to himself, remembering what was being served for tomorrow's dinner. There was a side door. Fortunately, with the key still in the lock, Alex turned it and let himself out. As a last-minute precaution, he locked the door and kept the key. Now at least he had a way back in. It was a soft grey night with a half-moon forming a perfect D in the sky. D for what? Alex wondered. Danger, discovery, or disaster? Only time would tell. He took 2 steps forward, then froze as a searchlight rolled past, centimetres away, directed from a tower he hadn't even seen. At the same time, he became aware of voices, and 2 guards walked slowly across the garden, patrolling the back of the house. They were both armed, and Alex remembered what Sale had said. An accidental shooting would save him £4,000. And given the importance of the Stormbreakers, would anyone care just how accidental the shooting would have been? He waited until the men had gone, then took the opposite direction, running along the side of the house, ducking under the windows. He reached the corner and looked round. In the distance, the airstrip was lit up, and there were figures, more guards and technicians everywhere. One man he recognised, walking past the fountain towards a waiting truck. He was tall and gangly, silhouetted against the lights, a black cutout. But Alex would have known Mr. Grin anywhere. They come in tonight at 0200 hours, night visitors, and Mr. Grimm was on his way to meet them. The butler had almost reached the truck, and Alex knew that if he waited any longer he would be too late. Throwing caution to the wind, he left the cover of the house and ran out into the open, trying to stay low and hoping his dark clothes would keep him invisible. He was only 50 metres from the truck when Mr. Grin suddenly stopped and turned round as if he had sensed there was something there. There was nowhere for Alex to hide. He did the only thing he could and threw himself flat on the ground, burying his face in the grass. He counted slowly to 5, then looked up. Mr. Grimm was turning once again. A second figure had appeared, Nadia Vole. It seemed she would be driving. She muttered something as she climbed into the front. Mr. Grin grunted and nodded. By the time Mr. Grin had walked round to the passenger door, Alex was once again up and running. He reached the back of the truck just as it began to move. It was similar to trucks he'd seen at the SAS camp. It could have been army surplus. The back was tall and square, covered with tarpaulin. Alex clambered onto the moving tailgate and threw himself in. He was only just in time. Even as he hit the floor, a car started up behind him, flooding the back of the truck with its headlamps. If he'd waited even a few seconds more, he would have been seen. In all, a convoy of 5 vehicles left Sale Enterprises. The truck Alex was in was the last but one. As well as Mr. Grin and Nadia Vole, at least a dozen uniformed guards were making the journey. But to where? Alex didn't dare look out the back, not with a car right behind him. He felt the truck slow down as they reached the main gate, and then they were out on the main road, driving rapidly uphill away from the village. Alex felt the journey without seeing it. He was thrown across the metal floor as they sped around the hairpin bends, and he only knew that they'd left the main road when he suddenly found himself being bounced up and down. The truck was moving more slowly. He sensed they were going downhill, following a rough track, and now he could hear something even over the noise of the engine. Waves. They'd come down to the sea. The truck stopped. There was the opening and slamming of car doors, the scrunch of boots on rocks, low voices talking. Alex crouched down, afraid that one of the guards would throw back the tarpaulin and discover him. But the voices faded and he found himself once again alone. Cautiously, he slipped out the back. He was right. The convoy had parked on a deserted beach. Looking back, he could see a track leading down from the road, which twisted up over the cliffs. Mr. Grin and the others had gathered outside, beside an old stone jetty that stretched out into the black water. He was carrying a torch. Alex saw him swing it in an arc. Growing even more curious, Alex crept forward and found a hiding place behind a cluster of boulders. It seemed they were waiting for a boat. He looked at his watch. It was exactly 2 o'clock. He almost wanted to laugh. Give the men flintlock pistols and horses and they could have come straight out of a children's book. Smuggling on the Cornish coast? Could that be what this was all about? Cocaine or marijuana coming in from the continent? Why else would they be here in the middle of the night? The question was answered a few seconds later. Alex stared, unable to quite believe what he was seeing. A submarine. It had emerged from the sea with the speed and impossibility of a huge stage illusion. One moment there was nothing, and then it was there in front of him, ploughing through the sea towards the jetty, its engine making no sound, water streaking off its silver casing and churning white behind it. The submarine had no markings, but Alex thought he recognised the shape of the diving plane slashing horizontally through the conning tower and the shark's tail rudder at the back. A Chinese Hans Class 404 SSN? Could that be what it is? Nuclear powered, armed, also with nuclear weapons. But what was it doing here off the coast of Cornwall? What was going on? The tower opened and a man climbed out, stretching himself in the cold morning air. Even without the half moon, Alex would have recognised the sleek, dancer's body and the close-cropped hair of the man whose photograph he had seen only a few days before. It was Yasin Grigorovich, the contract killer, the man who had murdered Ian Ryder. He was dressed in grey overalls. He was smiling. Yasin Grigorovich had supposedly met Sale in Cuba. Now here he was in Cornwall. So the two of them were working together. But why? Why would the Stormbreaker project need a man like him? Nadia Vold walked to the end of the jetty and Yasin climbed down to join her. They spoke for a few minutes, but even assuming they were speaking in English, there was no chance of their being overheard. Meanwhile, guards from Sale Enterprises had formed a line, stretching back almost to the point where the vehicles were parked. Yasin gave an order, and as Alex watched from behind the rocks, a large metallic silver box with a vacuum seal appeared, held by unseen hands. At the top of the submarine's tower, Yasin himself passed it down to the first of the guards, who then passed it back up the line. About 40 more boxes followed, one after another. It took almost an hour to unload the submarine. The men handled the boxes carefully. They didn't want to break whatever was inside. By 3 o'clock, they were almost finished. The boxes were now being packed into the back of the truck that Alex had vacated. And that was when it happened. One of the men, standing on the jetty, dropped one of the boxes. He managed to catch it again at the last minute, but even so, it banged down heavily on the stone surface. Everyone stopped instantly. It was as if a switch had been thrown, and Alex could almost feel the raw fear in the air. Yasin was the first to recover. He darted forward along the jetty, moving like a cat, his feet making no sound. He reached the box and ran his hands over it, checking the seal, then nodded slowly. The metal wasn't even dented. With everyone else so still, Alex heard the exchange that followed. "It's okay, I'm sorry," the guard said. "It's not damaged. Oh, I won't do that again." "No, you won't," Yasin agreed and shot him. The bullet spat out of his hand, red in the darkness. It hit the man in the chest, propelling him backwards in an awkward cartwheel. The man fell into the sea. For a few seconds he looked up at the moon as if trying to admire it one last time. Then the black water folded over him. It took them another 20 minutes to load the truck. Yassen got into the front with Nadia Vole. Mr. Grimm went in one of the cars. Alex had to time his return carefully. As the truck picked up speed, rumbling back up towards the road, he let the cover of the rocks. He left the cover of the rocks, ran forward and pulled himself in. There was hardly any room, but he managed to find a hole and squeeze himself into it. He ran a hand over one of the boxes. It was about the size of a tea chest, unmarked and cold to the touch. He tried to find a way to open it, but it was locked in a way he didn't understand. He looked back out of the truck. The beach and the jetty were already far below them. The submarine was pulling out to sea. One moment it was there, sleek and silver, gliding through the water. Then it had sunk below the surface, disappearing as quickly as a bad dream.